After our previous video, getting three really different sounds out of a single snare drum, we had a few questions about the details of going super low for a very resonant, very kind of boomy tuning. So we thought we would kind of do a little bit of a deep dive today and talk about the intricacies of getting that sound to work for you and what it takes to get it where you want it. So, the baseball bat through the wedding cake sound. It's become really popular lately. People are going for almost like a detuned, kind of trashy sounding snare. And I think it's coming somewhat from electronic music where people are taking samples and pitching them down, and people are hearing that and then wanting to go for that sound too. But the kind of big, wide snare sound goes back really far. I mean, all the way to like Al Green records. There are some pretty fat snare sounds on there too. So what does it take to get that kind of sound? First of all, the hard part is that there's going to be a lot of snare wire sound. There's going to be a lot of crosstalk between the snare and your rack tom, maybe the bass drum too. And it's something that we're kind of saddled with. We'll discuss some ways to kind of mitigate that, but this is going to be a messier sound. It's not going to feel as articulate as a normal kind of mid to high range snare tuning that you might be used to. Right now, this Supraphonic is tuned fairly high. It's not tabletop tight, but it's pretty high. This drum is only 5 inches deep. It's not a really deep, physically deep snare drum, but it's still deep enough for us to get a big, warm, boomy sound. So let's go for it. The first thing we need to do is figure out where we are right now pitch-wise. We can hear the fundamental, the lower, and then we can hear the harmonics coming as well. It's pretty high. The bottom head is harder to hear the pitch of because these sorts of drums with rounded overbearing edges have a little bit more suppression of the overtones. When I'm sitting with the drum and I want to take it to a really different tuning, I'll start with the batter head. We're going to end up changing the snare side as well, but we'll start with the batter head. And what we're going to do is bring it down a half turn on each tuning peg and then give it a listen. 1 half turn down. Let's see where we are. It's worth mentioning that this is a 10-lug drum, and if you have an 8-lug drum, a half turn will have a more dramatic effect on it than it does on a 10-lug drum because there's less nodes of pressure on the skin. But that's not important because we're not aiming for a specific pitch. We're just aiming for universally lower than we were before. Now, before we do anything else, let's see what it sounds like. It's a lot warmer than it was before. It's a lot more sustainy than it was before. There's a lot more snare wire sound. The head isn't perfectly in tune because there's always a little bit of slippage when you go down in terms of just like a certain amount of turn. So we would need to even it out a little bit again to get this head into a singular pitch. But I still think we could go a little bit lower. So before I bother with that, I'm going to go another quarter turn. Okay, we've gone down 1/4 turn more than we were before. Let's see where this pitch is at. Okay, I think this is a good place for us to stop going down any further than this. Now, one thing to always remember is when you're tuning the drum down, we can't get to a spot and then stop and not fuss with the lugs anymore because we will risk some of the lugs slipping just a little bit more that don't have quite as much tension on them as the other ones and resulting in the head going a little bit out of tune. So after I've gotten to my low tension, just a tiny bit up on all of the lugs to make sure that everybody is seated and there's pressure on all the lugs. There aren't any that are super loose. I like to think of tuning a drum head like 5, in the case of a 10-lug drum, guitar strings that go across from one side to the other. And Just like a guitar string, you never want to tune down to your target pitch. You want to tune past it and then back up a little bit to make sure that friction is on your side, whether it's a string or a head sliding across the edge of the drum. Now we've reached our target pitch, somewhere like this. See what that sounds like. For a fat snare sound, a certain amount of resonance is our friend, because resonance means sustain, and that's where we get that broad, wide sound from. But right now, the snare side head is working against us a little bit. It's causing the batter head to sing for a really long time and get very sort of tonal. There's a really strong pitch in there, kind of a note that could be dissonant with the track, or it could just be overwhelming to the rest of the mics on the drum set. So now we're going to flip the drum over and bring the snare side head also down quarter turn. All right, we've brought the snare side down a little bit, which means we're going to loosen the wires a little bit because the hoop has moved away, so the snares are tighter now than they were before. All right, now we're way down in the dumps. This is super low, it's super resonant, kind of crunchy sounding. There are some crazy overtones knocking around in there. And this drum alone by itself right now sounds kind of wild and crazy. However, in the context of a track with a lot of other stuff going on, or in the context of a live show, a lot of that kind of extra stuff on top is going to blend in and actually help your drum come through the mix. This is also where we start to look at a little bit of muffling on the batter head. This can be duct tape, this can be a wallet, this can be a handkerchief, anything really that you want to lay on there to just see how to balance out those overtones with the fundamental sound of the center of the drum. It's worth noting at this point also that, as was mentioned in one of the previous tuning videos, when you change one head, you are changing the sound of the other head, and that includes whether or not it sounds in tune with itself or not, because when you hit the batter head, it's interacting with the resonant head or the snare side head, and that relationship gives you a sense of whether it's in tune or not. And since I lowered the bottom head, even though I did it evenly, the batter head now sounds a little wobbly. There's some dissonance in there because it's interacting with this bottom head. And when you're tuning these two heads, they have to work together. And that means when you change one, you have to go back and check the other. In the case of a snare, it's more about the batter head checking when you've changed the snare side. I was explicitly not muffling the bottom head when I was doing that because I'm actually listening for whether or not the pitches are getting along with each other. If I were to set this on a couch or a bed or a pillow to mute the other side and just tune this head, I would only be hearing this head and whether or not it was interacting well with itself. But in this situation, we actually need to hear how they're getting along as a unit. It's also important to note that even there, I was only tuning up. I wasn't tuning any of the lugs down. I found the one that was low and I found the one that was high, and I matched the low ones to the highest one. That again is to prevent the possibility of any slippage after you've completed your tuning. If you're tuning up, that's always going to be better than if you're tuning down and then leaving it. Now we've reached our target pitch relationship between the two heads. Let's see how it sounds. Now, as so often is the case, now that I've gotten everything evened out, I'm still not 100% happy with it. But I am happy with how the batter head feels. So what do you do in this situation? You're like, I feel like it should be working, but it's not. Well, the first thing I'm going to do is go back to the snare side head, because the batter head's feeling good. I know it's the pitch that I want, and if I'm hearing something funny in the wires or I'm hearing something funny in the sustain, it's probably coming from the other side of the drum. So I'm going to go down even lower on the snare side head. It's still pretty tight right now, but I'm going to go even lower. That was about a quarter turn down and then just a little nudge back up on each one of them. That's a significantly bigger note. Now that's getting pretty fat. So now that we've gotten it there, let's experiment with a little bit of muffling on top. This is just a little piece of rolled up hand towel set by the edge and striking the center, not catching the rim. Sounds pretty good. The next step up is some kind of ring to cover more surface area of the head and give us even more suppression of the resonance of the drum. This is an E ring from Evans, the wide one. That sounds great. I think that one thing that does happen sometimes when people are going for this kind of sound is they still end up doing rim shots when they hit the drum. And I think that you can use that sound, but if you're going for this degree of low tuning, the fatness is really more of center of the drum without catching the rim, maybe even with the butt of the stick. Just as a comparison, this is butt of the stick in the center and then a rim shot. Both great sounds, but you can kind of see how they compare to each other. And this also goes to show you that something as simple as a little plastic ring can really, really, really bring that thick, low, fat sound out of what is not a thick, low, or fat snare drum.